Rising with James Farr. This new weekly show will explore the deep roots and resilience of Altadena's Black community as we track its recovery and reimagine its future. From relief efforts to rebuilding, we're raising up voices, stories, and solutions to build back Black Altadena better and stronger than ever. It's Conversation Live, Altadena Rising with James Farr, every Saturday at 10 a.m. beginning Saturday, March 8th, with an encore presentation, Sundays at noon.
James Farr, the man who is the voice for Black Los Angeles.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your black.
Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those that trespass against us. Although them again we will never, never, never trust. Them not know what them do. Dig out your eye while I'm sticking like glue. Blink skin grin while I'm plotting for you. True.
Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do.
May I tell them no?
Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do.
But real, them not a clue.
Beware the false motives of others. Be careful of those who pretend to be brothers, and you never suppose it's those who are closest to you. They say all the right things to gain their position.
KBLA Talk 1580.
Use your kindness is there.
That's right. Well, I'm really excited to welcome into the space someone who's got a lot of experience and understanding of how things work that we may not have ourselves. He's a former Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor for the U.S. Department of State, a former he oversaw the Bureau's work on Western Hemisphere and Africa, served as Senior Advisor in the Office of the Undersecretary for Civilian Security, Democracy, and Human Rights, held a portfolio in Western Hemisphere migration, strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability, and oversaw portfolios related to the Bureau for International Narcotics, Law Enforcement, and the Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations. Enrique Roig, welcome.
Good morning, Dominique. How are you? Good to
I'm
be with you.
good. Thank you for joining us. I'm smiling in my voice because as I'm reading all of the things that you've done, it crosses my mind that many of us don't even know these portfolios, these bureaus, these responsibilities exist, right? We've heard
Yes.
we've heard of the Department of State, we've heard of USAID, but many folks don't even understand what they really do. And so I wonder if we could kind of start there, even though I know that's super basic.
No, sure. My pleasure. I know it's an alphabet soup of a lot of different bureaus and agencies here in Washington. But essentially the last bureau I was working in was the Bureau for Human Rights, Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, which is the main bureau responsible for documenting human rights abuses worldwide. So we issue the annual Human Rights Report, which documents essentially human rights abuses, labor abuses that are happening. And so that is the main responsibility of that bureau, in addition to funding programs across the globe to support human rights defenders, civic activists, independent journalists who are often working in countries that are dealing with democratic backsliding and political repression. And so that was also a big part of the portfolio there. The International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Bureau is basically the main office that deals with support to law enforcement overseas, training for police officers, community policing efforts, providing equipment on counter-narcotics efforts in places like Colombia and Central America and Mexico, and other countries globally as well. And the Office for Conflict Stabilization Operations is the unit within the State Department that does a lot of the analysis of where conflicts are taking place to provide recommendations for how to carry out negotiations and other mediations, for example, in places like Ukraine or in Sudan, for example. And so Those are sort of the kind of, quick background of some of those offices. And there is another office called Population, Refugees, and Migration that I also work with, and they provide a lot of the humanitarian assistance to countries overseas that are dealing with large populations of internally displaced persons, or trying to reintegrate migrants in places like Colombia, that currently has received almost 2.5 million Venezuelans who have fled the Maduro regime there. So in any case, that's a lot of things that are happening that state has been pursuing, but unfortunately under this current Trump administration, a lot of those programs have been cut. And so I'm sure we'll get into that as part of this discussion.
Yeah, well, definitely. I mean, last night in the president's speech, he went through a list of things that they defunded, alleged things that were allegedly defunded.
Right.
And I think it paints a picture of, USAID, foreign aid, and the work of the Department of State that is very misleading. I mean, I'm going to say, according to what I know, I don't claim to be an expert, but how did you receive that list, or can you speak to anything that that he spoke of as far as things that he listed as ridiculous expenditures of taxpayer dollars?
Yeah, unfortunately, the White House and the DOGE, led by Elon Musk, has been putting out a lot of what I would call misinformation, disinformation on what USAID has been funding overseas, and often taking things out of context to make it seem like, USAID has been funding frivolous programs without looking at the bigger picture. I mean, for the most part, USAID's portfolio, I would say about 75% of it goes towards humanitarian assistance and global health programs. And so everything from things like disease detection of Ebola and Marburg in Africa to, providing essential life-saving humanitarian assistance programs in places like Sudan, Colombia, Gaza, for example, programs actually which, benefit the U.S. USAID buys almost $2 billion worth of food commodities from farmers across the Midwest that actually go towards humanitarian assistance programs in Africa, for example. And so a lot of that food aid right now is actually rotting away in ports in Houston because of the stop work orders that this administration has put into place. So it's having a disastrous effect not only for individuals in places like Sudan, South Sudan, who are not receiving this assistance, but also for farmers who also rely on USAID for selling a lot of their commodities. And so, unfortunately, a lot of the programming from USAID has been, I would say, weaponized to discredit the agency and foreign assistance in a way that is really detrimental to our own national security back here, because really USAID has been kind of the leading tool in the toolbox for our, soft power that we influence overseas, in addition to our diplomatic efforts and our defense as well. So we are really seeing the space at this moment to the Chinese and the Russians when it comes to what's happening with the pullback in foreign assistance.
I actually was reading how Chinese and Russians are actually trying to recruit some of the federal workers who have been laid off, which seemed pretty alarming.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think that's something to be concerned about. And not only that, but they're also looking at being able to support programs in these countries where USAID now is no longer present. So, for example, the Chinese funding, the construction of schools or curriculum or other health type initiatives to also gain influence in many of these countries. And so, again, without the ability for USAID to carry out these efforts overseas, like I say, we're really handing over a lot of the goodwill that USAID has generated since 1961 when President Kennedy first created the agency. And so, unfortunately, now we've seen with almost 10,000 USAID workers who have been laid off, the agency has essentially been decapitated. Now, just today, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the plaintiffs who have been suing the administration for not paying their bills, almost $2 billion that are owed to USAID contractors and other international organizations that are owed this amount of money. So can you imagine that the U.S. government just decided not to pay its bills. Fortunately, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the plaintiffs, and so hopefully we'll see quick payments take place. But, the damage, unfortunately, Dominique, has been done because a lot of these organizations have already been laying off staff, in some cases up to 90%. And so for them to start up again is going to, take some effort. It's not going to be easy. And in some cases, they may just end up closing up shop. So, again, we're looking at a whole sector of foreign aid that really has been decimated in the last 4 weeks in a way that we've never seen before.
And when we talk about this $2 billion being restored and people getting paid for things, expenditures that have already been charged or whatever, there's also no guarantee that there will be ongoing assistance moving forward, right? Because those have to have congressional approvals moving forward. So if I'm an agency that has not had my bills paid and I've laid folks off, am I going to feel confident bringing people back when there's no guarantee of the U.S. continuing to support the work in the future?
No, exactly. And I think that's what a lot of the organizations are contending with now, whether, to even carry out programs that are being uncanceled, for example. So there have been some contracts that were terminated that State Department now is coming back and saying, we're ready to turn those back on. But if you're an organization that owed, $130 million, which, happens to be the case of many, you're not exactly going to, incur more costs at this point, not knowing whether the U.S. government is actually going to pay you for those services, right? So, again, it's not, that simple of just turning things back on again, particularly when the U.S. is defaulting on its payments to these organizations.
Yeah, when we continue this conversation, I really want to look at how this, I want to look at how it impacts the world, but also you referenced it, how it impacts the U.S. Folks do complain, and sometimes I've even over the years myself said, well, we need to focus on home, but international aid has an impact on home, and some of that aid is for home. So I want to look at that too, so that people can really understand what we're talking about here, because I feel like there is, just from my personal conversations with people that don't even normally track this stuff at all, there is this perception, we don't need to be buying condoms for people in whatever it was, Cameroon or whatever the misinformation was. So we're talking about real impacts, what those are, what does it mean, and how does that ricochet back to home? That and more when we continue on KBLA Talk 1580.
Say the quiet part out loud. KBLA Talk 1580.
Diane from Michigan, a disabled senior citizen trying to get by. Henry from Florida, a veteran fighting to make ends meet. Elena from Arizona, a mother struggling to feed her daughter. Hi, I'm Connie Britton, and I support Feeding America because they help provide over 6 billion meals to people in need each year, like Diane, Henry, and Elena. Learn more at feedingamerica.org. Feeding America, 200 food banks strong.
KBLA Talk 1580 is pleased to announce that like George and Weezy,
We're moving on now.
earlier this year, we were named a semi-finalist for the American Climate Leadership Awards 2025. Wait for it. You ready? KBLA Talk 1580 was recently selected as one of 10 finalists being considered for this prestigious award. Hundreds of organizations, institutions, and even cities were nominated in the selection process. But KBLA Talk 1580 has made it to the finals. You're invited to watch live on Wednesday, April 16th. At 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Central, as Eco America announces the winner and the runner-up, awarding over $200,000 in prize money. To watch live, just go to ecoamerica.org to register and attend the online ceremony. That's ecoamerica.org. Don't miss the presentation of the American Climate Leadership Awards 2025, Wednesday, April 16th, and wish us luck. Caring about the climate, caring about the community, changing the conversation. We're KBLA Talk 1580, and we've got your black.
We're with Bridget, whose husband won't be home for months, and whose daughter is due any day. We're with Mike, who's leaving home to protect his family and yours. We're with all service members and their families who need community, connection, and maybe a bit of magic. Are you with them? Learn more at uso.org today.
There's new reaction following the Trump administration's sweeping efforts to cut the federal workforce.
Fired but not forgotten. The Testimony Project. Bearing witness, breaking silence, building community. KBLA Talk 1580 is committed to amplifying the voices of Black federal workers impacted by the mass firings. Rooted in the Black tradition of testimony, this initiative ensures that those who served us are not erased from history. Through firsthand accounts, investigative storytelling, and community-driven dialogue, we intend to expose injustice, preserve truth, and demand accountability. If you or someone you know has been forced out of federal employment due to the mass firings, please contact us at info@smileyAudiomedia.com or via the open mic feature on the KBLA 1580 app. We want to hear from you and share your story. KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your black.
Thanks for waking up with Dominique DiPrima on KBLA Talk 1580.
And I do appreciate you being with us. This morning we're talking with former Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor at the U.S. Department of State, Enrique Roig. I so appreciate you spending the hour with us. And there's so much to cover. Were you surprised by the Supreme Court's decision around, reinstating this $2 billion? And do you think it maybe bodes well for other cuts? We see the president walking back the dismissal of the probationary employees. I guess based on the court ruling of Judge William Alsup, is this giving you hope that we could see some return to a more typical way of doing business?
Well, I definitely hope so, Dominique. I mean, it was a little bit too close for comfort as well, right? It was a 5-4 decision, and dissenting opinion by Alito was troubling as well. But I think at the end of the day, the majority also wanted to avoid a constitutional crisis because, the implications, again, of the U.S. government not paying $2 billion in bills and services, money that's owed to organizations that predate January 20th, would be extreme. The implications that would have also just on the banking sector here that's provided lines of credit to these organizations. The ripple effect would be, I think, disastrous, right? So I think, they made the wise decision in this case, and hopefully it'll have impact on others going forward. But, like I pointed out earlier, the damage has been done. Obviously, the USAID with the termination of almost 10,000 employees to date. And so turning all this back on is going to be a bit of a challenge. The State Department itself does not have the capacity to administer foreign aid in the way that USAID has been doing. And so I think it's a bit of folly to think that they're going to take this on and somehow be able to carry forward. So hopefully we get to a place where AID can resume its functions back to, hopefully some place of normalcy, but we'll see.
Well, and when I talk about the impact on home, meaning, in the United States, I think about this emphasis on immigration or migration, refugees, whatever. To me, and this is, again, I'm not on the inside, but to me, if you're taking away programs that are meant to make life more bearable for folks, for example, in Latin America, in Haiti, post-earthquake, in Latin America, given the all of the challenges there, whether it be natural disasters or drug cartels. When you take away these programs, even in Africa, it seems like people are going to be more likely to come here, right? Because the outlook in their home countries is grimmer. The violence may rise. And these are the things that make people flee in the first place. So, to me, I would see that as one direct impact on your country, if that's a concern for folks. Is that a fair analysis?
No, for sure, and particularly in the Western Hemisphere, right? USAID has been instrumental in supporting efforts to mitigate migration to the U.S. And so in Central America, USAID has been funding the root cause of the strategy, which goes back to the Obama administration and was having impact in terms of reducing the number of migrants. But then during Trump 1, he began to cut back on a lot of those programs. Under Biden, they were picked up again. And in the last year, we saw the lowest numbers of migrant encounters at the southwest border, going back even to Trump's first term, right? So these programs do matter, not only in Central America, but also in places like Colombia, which I mentioned earlier has currently been reintegrating almost 2.5 million Venezuelans who have fled to that country, as well as in Peru and Ecuador, where USAID and State Department have also been providing humanitarian assistance for refugees and migrants. And then you have Haiti, which is a country that is dealing with horrible gang violence. And so you've also seen significant outflow of Haitians who have been also leaving and coming to the U.S., in addition to Haitians who, right after COVID, were living in Chile, for example, Brazil, who had migrated there after the earthquake in Haiti. But due to economic reasons and others, started to leave those countries and make their way to the U.S. And so a lot of the effort that USAID was doing was also looking for ways to try and reintegrate Haitians into other countries as well, and also provide some semblance of stability in Haiti, which is not an easy thing to do. But USAID's portfolio there is pretty significant, or was. It's providing humanitarian assistance and some economic development efforts, as well as community violence prevention work. So all of these programs, when you add them up, do play a significant role, and now they don't exist anymore. And so I'm not optimistic in terms of the future, even though Trump last night in the State of the Union was saying, we're seeing the lowest numbers of migrant encounters. He said 8,000 last month, which I highly suspect of that number. We'll see when the data actually comes out. But yeah, that's where we are at this moment.
And then we heard Elon Musk, and I must say I thoroughly enjoyed the piece that you wrote in the Washington Eye. We'll get to that.
Yes, thank you.
About Elon Musk. Yeah, it gave me a great laugh, but also some insights. We heard him in the Oval Office talking about the program to mitigate Ebola, right? That he's saying, that funding has been restored. And you mentioned Marburg, and, there are other disease prevention, mitigation programs around the world. They're saying they've turned the spigot back on, but then we are hearing from, a senior USAID official who was actually let go, that is not actually quite true. That these things, I guess Nicholas Enrich, acting assistant administrator for global health, saying not actually really happening. And then he is fired or steps down. How do you read that? Are these programs being reinstated? Is it smoke and mirrors? I think we all learned during COVID that diseases travel fast around the world.
No, exactly. And unfortunately, they're not being restarted. It's, smoke and mirrors. In this case, I know that for a fact that these programs are still on standby and have not been restarted, basically because, again, there's nobody left at USAID to actually manage the, the oversight and the monitoring and the restart of these programs. USAID has contracting officers who deal with these kinds of things, and they've been pretty much stripped of those. And so, and again, you've got organizations who haven't been paid and are not necessarily willing to take on additional costs until they receive payment for, previous services. So it puts us, again, in a predicament where critical programs like these that do disease detection are not being implemented, whether it's Ebola or Marburg. There's a significant Marburg outbreak in Africa and Rwanda, for example. So these are all things we should be concerned about because, the world is a tight-knit place, right? It's very easy to get on a plane and be somewhere in 7 hours. And so, we should all be concerned about this. And let me just add that, for example, USAID is, less than 1% of the total budget of the U.S., right? It's about $40 to $60 billion a year. That's about $36 per person per year of investment, which is about 6 Starbucks lattes. And for that money, for that $36 that you're getting a year, you are paying for things like disease detection, for example. You're buying humanitarian assistance that's providing support to displaced populations all over the world. That is part of our U.S. values and principles of doing good, but also has the benefit of people not migrating to Europe or even here to the U.S., right? And so, again, it has implications for our own national economic security back home. And again, a lot of USAID assistance also buys, as I said earlier, food commodities from farmers in the Midwest, or funds universities in the U.S. who are doing research on diseases, for example, or are supporting efforts to go after human traffickers or drug smugglers, for example. And so it has a huge benefit, again, for our national security, and this is why cutting back on this assistance right now is really doing harm to our own country.
And as you mentioned, those U.S. farmers that are exporting those foods, the president has suggested, just sell it here, but in reality, that probably is not going to work, number one, because we can't eat all that food. And number two, it doesn't solve the problem of international hunger and poverty.
No, exactly. And again, this has been a hallmark of U.S. Power and generosity around the world to be able to support countries in crisis with this type of assistance. In addition to being able to help resolve conflicts, whether it's, again, in places in Africa or the Middle East. And so, these are critical efforts, for also providing vaccines to children, for diseases, things like HIV prevention, PEPFAR, which was a program that was started by President Bush. I mean, all these things currently have been essentially terminated and put on hold in some cases. And so, not only are we talking about, our own national security, but also the implications for just, human beings that are living in these other countries who are now at a greater risk of potential death or disease. And so, the U.S. has always been seen as a reliable partner across the world. It's not to say we are perfect, but at the end of the day, we bring to the table certain values and principles and goodwill that wins us trust among many countries and builds relationships that are critical, not only for building democracies and other markets for our own investments, but just for, being on the right side of history and helping others.
Enrique Roig is my guest, and we'll continue the conversation after news, traffic, and sports, only on KBLA Talk 1580.
She's reclaiming her time on KBLA Talk 1580. More First Things First with Dominique DiPrima when we come forward.
I'm Bree Wood with 4 Things You Should Know with BIN News. President Trump's Tuesday night address to Congress was the longest ever, highlighting his leadership and plans for the U.S. Several Democrats walked out in protest, and Black Texas Democrat Al Green was escorted out for yelling at Trump. The Supreme Court will decide if Mexico's $10 billion lawsuit against U.S. gun makers can proceed after hearing arguments. Mexico claims U.S. gun makers contribute to gun violence in the country. Both liberals and conservative justices questioned the lawsuit's validity. Washington, D.C.'s Black Lives Matter Plaza will be replaced with a mural project for America's 250th birthday. This follows a House bill to rename the area Liberty Plaza and remove the 2020 mural. And LeBron James, in his 22nd NBA season, became the first player to reach 50,000 combined regular season and postseason points. He achieved the milestone with his first basket against the New Orleans Pelicans on Tuesday. Get BIN News on demand 24/7 on the iHeartRadio app.
Let Express Employment Professionals help you hire for contract or full-time jobs. Forget about recruiting, sifting through resumes, and interviews with unqualified applicants. Go to expresspros.com to find the location near you. That's expresspros.com.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
Another win for the Lakers, another milestone for LeBron. The Lakers extended their winning streak to 7 games after their 136-115 win over New Orleans at Crypto.com. First 7-game winning streak for the Lakers since February 12, 2021. As for LeBron, he became the first NBA player to score a combined 50,000 points in the regular season and playoffs. The 22-year veteran passed the 50,000 mark on his first shot, a three-pointer with 8 minutes left in the first quarter. LeBron finished with 34 points. He now has 41,871 in the regular season and 8,162 in the playoffs. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Put this man in the Hall of Fame right now. The Clippers have lost 3 straight. They had a 19-point lead in Phoenix at the start of the fourth quarter and couldn't hold it. Phoenix fought back to pull out a 119-117 win. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson on KBLA Talk 1580.
We asked seniors how to prevent Medicare scams.
My best advice, if you get a phone call, do not talk to the person. These people are well trained. Don't talk to them.
They don't know me. They're just trying to scam me.
Don't be fooled. Hang up. Just hang up.
Never give out your Medicare number.
They're going to get your number to put in a false claim.
If I get a call from someone, I don't pick up the phone. And should I pick up the phone and they ask for information, then I hang up.
How do you detect Medicare fraud?
Just like I check my credit card statements, I check my Medicare statements monthly.
Scammers can get a hold of your number, order medical devices through your account, and you're not even going to know about it if you don't look at your statement.
Check your statement every month. If you get your statement and you see something that you know you did not have done, you report it.
Call your senior Medicare Patrol.
To report Medicare fraud, call the Senior Medicare Patrol at 855-613-7080.
If you're living with dry age-related macular degeneration or dry AMD, you may be at risk for developing geographic atrophy or GA. GA can be unpredictable and progress rapidly, leading to irreversible vision loss. Now there's something you can do to
slow it down and get it going slower.
Izervay is proven to slow GA progression.
Izervay gets GA going slower.
Izervay or avacincaptad pagel is a prescription eye injection used to treat GA. Don't take it if you have an infection or active swelling in or around your eye. Izervay can cause eye infection, retinal detachment, or increased risk of wet AMD. Izervay may temporarily increase eye pressure. Your vision may be impaired after an eye injection or exam. Don't delay. Ask your doctor about Izervay today.
Izervay gets GA going slower.
Visit Izervay.com. That's IZERVAY.com.
One of life's greatest mysteries has finally been solved.
Who let the dogs out? Spruce, spruce, spruce.
It's Spruce, the new hard-working, worry-free weed and grass killer that's safe for use around people and pets. When used as directed, spray the leaves for visible results in just 1 hour and dead weeds in just 1 day. You spray, they play. Weeds die by the next day. Find Spruce wherever weed killers are sold.
You still thinking job change in the new year?
Yeah, I need something that's in high demand and more stable in this economy.
IT?
Yeah, cybersecurity, maybe even AI.
That's what I did.
Really? How?
Went to My Computer Career. You don't need any prior experience, and you could start your new career in a matter of months. A lot of IT pros go to school there, too, to level up.
Sweet. Are classes online or on campus?
Both.
Wow, I'll check it out. Thanks.
Make this your year. Take the free career evaluation now at mycomputercareer.edu. Financial aid is available for qualified students.
We knew you'd stick around. This is LA's home for progressive talk radio. Be heard. Welcome back to KBLA Talk 1580.
He's got an MA in International Relations from American University in D.C., a BA in Poli-Sci from Westmont College in Santa Barbara, California, right up the street, and has worked around the world. Former Deputy Assistant Secretary, Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, the U.S. State Department. Enrique Roig is my guest, and I was reading your, I guess it's a spoof in the Washington Eye, but it's based, it's got a thing or two to say about Mr. Musk. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
But it's based on this letter that went out, right? That told federal employees to write a memo saying what they did last week. And the first thing I'm thinking is, what if I work for the CIA? What if I, it's just like there's so many things that we shouldn't be saying, probably. And well, talk about your response.
Sure. Well, it was funny because it was one of the things where I was traveling and at time zone 13 hours ahead of mine, so I was suffering from a little bit of insomnia and woke up in the middle of the night reading some other responses that colleagues were posting on LinkedIn and said, well, maybe I'll write a funny one and see what happened. So I started drafting my response of what I did last week, even though I'm not a federal employee anymore, and started playing around with some text. And then I thought, I wonder if I put this in ChatGPT, what it'll spit out. And I started running different versions of it, and it came out with this rather hilarious spoof on what I did my last 5 days, which basically was, me meditating on the fact that, Elon Musk essentially was looking for ways to enrich himself so that he could fly a mission to Mars and, settle down, but then is met by a group of Martians who quickly ask him, what is he doing on their planet? He breaks out into a TED Talk. They're not really impressed with him and decide to put him on Martian ice, flight back home, and deport him back to the U.S. And they start live tweeting this on Martian X and making fun of the fact that they've now deported this billionaire. So, but ended it with kind of a tribute to, USAID and the importance of the work that they're trying to do. And isn't it ironic that here you have an agency that's trying to do, all that's good, and now you've got this billionaire who's basically interested in enriching himself so that he can further his ambitions of, flying to Mars in an habitable planet, as opposed to, working to save lives here on planet Earth. So that was kind of the gist of it.
Yeah, it's hilarious. You can find it at thewashingtoneye.com if you want to find it. And, one of the sort of barbs that you say is, "Dear Elon, taxpayer-funded Musk." I mean, that's part of the irony for me, is that he's running around cutting things and in jobs while having received reportedly $38 billion in subsidies over the course of his own journey as an entrepreneur and an immigrant.
Right. Well, exactly. I mean, talk about somebody who's benefited from taxpayer money, right? I mean, Starlink, Tesla, SpaceX have all benefited from our hard-earned U.S. taxpayer money, and you've got him now as an unelected, bureaucrat, essentially, who's going around cutting programs using AI without any, real deep understanding of, in this case, foreign assistance or, any evaluation, understanding of the evaluations that have been done of, many of these programs. I mean, that's the thing. USAID is probably the most evaluated agency in the U.S. government. All you have to do is go to the General Accounting Office website to see all the evaluations done of USAID programs. And this is why there's also so many contracting officers within USAID that do the monitoring and oversight, because of, to ensure that U.S. taxpayer money is spent in a way that ensures efficiency and transparency. But now you've got Elon Musk, who essentially is doing the opposite. So,
and who has his hand in the cookie jar. I mean, he's able to take away a contract from Verizon and give it to Starlink and that kind of thing, which seems very shady, if not illegal. But I think I want to circle back to your point about the U.S. aid budget being about 1% of our overall, because as a taxpayer, consumer, worker in this country, you hear, this many million, you hear, the president last night saying that $8 million were spent to promote LGBTQ plus people in Lesotho, in the African nation of Lesotho. And that just sounds like tons of money. $1 million here, $1 billion there, even though I know some of these things are made up or inflated, but we don't put it in the context of the overall U.S. budget.
Well, exactly. And, unfortunately, these things get cherry-picked to further try and damage the reputation of USAID. So, for example, a lot of the programs that fund LGBTQI plus communities are done in the context of countries that where this community in particular suffers, pretty, rather horrible human rights abuses. As we like to say often, abuses against the LGBTQI community is often sort of the canary in the coal mine when it comes to countries that are becoming more repressive. And so,
like
these types of
ours,
initiatives.
Sorry to say.
Right.
Yeah.
No, exactly. And so, we saw this across the board in many countries that were adopting very repressive anti-LGBTQI plus laws, for example, horrible discriminatory laws. And so a lot of these efforts were to provide support to them to do advocacy, for example, or psychosocial support to victims of abuse, But again, these are part of larger efforts that generally would support civic activists and human rights defenders in many of these countries. And so, to cherry pick something and say, oh, look, they were funding a trans opera in Ecuador, is disingenuous, but it also does a disservice to these communities that do suffer. And obviously this has become part of a larger political agenda to discriminate against trans people in particular, as we saw in the speech last night at the State of the Union about this trans ideology, which I would argue is not it's not an ideology, right? So that's a whole nother discussion. But a lot of cherry picking that happens. And similar with sort of, USAID's been funding DEI programs in Serbia. I worked in Serbia. I can tell you what a lot of those programs are, providing inclusion, for example, to, populations that have disabilities, to provide them access to, government buildings, for example, or be able to, have access to information that they can, that people with blind people can actually, have access to. So these are legitimate things that we're supporting in many countries that also builds goodwill, but also promotes democracy in many of these countries where we want to build these partnerships. But unfortunately, it's become, they've become politicized in the current context.
Yeah, it's almost feeling really unavoidable right now. Another thing that came up last night, but which is a persistent theme of the current administration's, kind of confusing if you followed Elon Musk in his career, being this electric car hero and getting tons of subsidies for green technology, is this idea that there's a new Green New Deal scam or whatever. I can't remember the exact verbiage, but I think about countries in Africa where I went last summer, and the growing concern about how their livelihoods are being impacted by the climate emergency, people's ability to fish or farm, et cetera, et cetera. And so that concern for them is not some esoteric idea about, let's make the planet greener. It's life or death. And so talk to me a little bit about how some of these climate mitigation programs that are being cut internationally may impact people's lives.
Yeah, you've made the point here. In Africa, where I traveled extensively also last year, excuse me, in Latin America as well, every country I traveled to was dealing with some kind of negative effects of climate change, right? Whether it's droughts or hurricanes in other cases. And so for them, this is an existential threat that they're facing. And so, programs that help them, deal with either, disaster prevention efforts, in the case of a hurricane or whatever other kind of natural disaster related to climate, these are critical programs for communities to have these types of early warning systems, for example, or in countries that are facing drought, how to deal with, to mitigate the negative effects of that or prevent, other effects of climate change. I was in South Sudan last year, and this was a major topic of conversation in terms of sort of changing weather patterns and how that was affecting drought conditions in the country. And obviously then, you need to look at what kinds of other food assistance do you need to provide in these types of contexts to mitigate the potential harmful effects, right? So, this is just something that we're going to continue to see be exacerbated, unfortunately, globally. And so it's really unfortunate this administration's taken this stance on climate, and really we're going backwards in a way that it's really detrimental to all of us.
For me, it's also it's what I call you broke it, you buy it. I mean, because I feel like this is not just us being so charitable and helping these countries with a climate emergency. In many cases, we were the main drivers of those greenhouse gases that are impacting other countries disproportionately. That's why I call it you break it, you buy it. We do a thing, and then we come and say, okay, here, we're going to help you. To me, that is our responsibility, since we are, one of the world's main perpetrators of that green crisis that we're currently facing.
No, exactly. And at the same time, when we pull out of international fora on climate change, it limits our ability to hold other countries accountable as well, in particular the Chinese. And so, from a policy diplomatic perspective, we're also doing damage to ourselves by not being able to hold other countries accountable when we pull out of these different fora. And again, not being able to support countries who really need this assistance to deal with climate change. Because again, it also has impacts on migration, right? I mean, many these displaced populations are leaving areas because of the effects of climate change. And again, drought is a major concern in Africa. And so, if we're not willing to deal with the bigger issue of, our own greenhouse gases, but also the support that's needed at the local level, then we're going to see, I think, more of an uptick in migration worldwide. And we're at the largest numbers globally that we've ever seen in the last couple of years. And so, as things get worse in this regard, I think we're in for, potential more negative effects.
When you say the largest levels we've seen, you're talking about people migrating because of the conditions that may be caused by the climate emergency?
Exactly. Climate emergency, in addition to what we saw post-COVID with the pandemic, as well as conflicts that are taking place in Africa, in the Middle East, in addition to economic issues as well on the ground in many countries. And so a combination of all those factors have really led to the largest displacement of humans in global history. And so, this is why also during the Biden administration, we saw such an uptick in numbers that were coming to the southwest border. A lot of that was coming out of the post-COVID pandemic as well, where populations were being displaced because there was no employment opportunities for them, or because of political reasons in Venezuela, but across a lot of Africa, when you see folks migrating to Europe, a lot of it has to do with climate change.
We're talking with Enrique Roig. He's the former Deputy Assistant Secretary, the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor at the U.S. Department of State. We will continue this conversation when we come forward, exclusively on KBLA Talk 1580.
More of First Things First with Dominique DiPrima when we come forward.
I joined the military for my kid and his mom. I miss my son a lot. One of the things with the military is tobacco, but I saw a lot of people try to deal with mental issues. Everyone's vaping constantly. After my first hit of a vape, I was hooked like that. Once I got back home from my deployment, I caught my son trying to hit my vape. That was it. I had to quit.
Isaiah started vaping to try to deal with stress and quit because of his son. Learn how he and other Californians are rising above big tobacco at undo.org.
Fatherhood includes being present during pregnancy, delivery, and beyond, supporting your partner, and advocating for your baby's health. Black fathers play a key role in reducing maternal and infant health inequalities. Join the free AIM Fatherhood Program and make a difference. Visit blackinfantsandfamilies.org/fatherhood.
Life blooms in beautiful ways. The Afia Center invites you to celebrate At the End with Red Gala, honoring the strength and resilience of Black women living with HIV. Join us for an evening of empowerment as we launch the Barbara Cambridge Scholarship and kick off Herstory Month with our theme, Life in Full Bloom. Your support helps create vital HIV programming and builds a future where every voice is heard and every story matters. The End with Red Gala, because every flower deserves to bloom.
To learn more and to donate, visit theafiacenter.org.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580 is committed to self-care and community well-being. Walk Good LA was formed in June 2020, inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement and the beginning stages of the COVID-19 pandemic. What began as a few minutes of breath work and yoga meditation before protests against police brutality turned into a safe space for the community to heal in hard times. The immensely positive response from the community transformed the momentum into a movement. Today, Walk Good LA is a Black and brown-led community wellness organization based in Los Angeles. They provide spaces for healing through community yoga classes, guided meditations, hikes, run clubs, and other activations throughout Los Angeles that attract hundreds of members weekly. With the help of Propel and Michael B. Jordan, they now have a yoga and wellness studio in Los Angeles called the Walk Good Yard. To join their mailing list and connect with healing spaces, please visit walkgoodla.org. That's walkgoodla.org. Or find them on Instagram at walkgoodla. This is a community call to action, a community call to healing from KBLA Talk 1580.
Small businesses are the heart of America. But you don't have to go it alone. As the nation's largest nonprofit resource of expert business mentoring, SCORE has helped millions of entrepreneurs build their businesses for free. Get the connections, education, and guidance you need with SCORE. We're ready to help. Find a mentor today at score.org.
You carry a lot. The needs of your family and friends, the responsibilities of work and home, and that doesn't stop when your period starts. New Always Ultra Thin pads are designed to keep up with your busy life. When an unexpected gush hits, you need to trust that your pad has your back and your flow. With new and improved rapid dry technology, Always Ultra Thin now absorbs 3 times faster than the leading size 2 store brand pad, so you can feel cleaner, drier, and fresher. Always Ultra Thin. Always gush ready.
The conversation continues right now with Dominique DiPrima on First Things First.
So many things that, we hadn't considered or probably didn't even think about. The USAID agency for the United States and the Department of State does so many things that we kind of take for granted, don't even think about. And that's why I'm grateful for this conversation this morning with former Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor for the U.S. Department of State, Enrique Roig. And one thing, we've talked about food, we've talked about disease and the climate emergency, but certainly your work around human rights is not to be underestimated. So speak a little bit, if you would, about how these things that apparently may not impact human rights struggles around the world will, and why that's something we ought to be paying attention to.
Well, this is, a big role of my previous bureau, the Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, right? So much of the support that we provide to human rights activists or defenders and civic activists and labor union leaders, for example, around the world who are often doing this work in repressive environments. One of the things I'm the most proud of is the role the State Department played in helping the release of political prisoners from Nicaragua on 2 occasions. The first time, some 225 political prisoners, including 6 presidential candidates who were rotting in jail, that we were able to get released. And then the second time, 135 political prisoners, which I had the privilege of flying down as part of the team to go and pick them up and bring them back. So, these are the types of things that the State Department does that are critical to the support that we provide to activists around the world. And, the work that's done annually to document human rights abuses in many countries is an important part of our diplomatic efforts as well to promote accountability and transparency on these issues, right? And again, it's not to say the United States is a perfect country when it comes to these things, but it does allow for an important conversation on human rights issues across the board and reflecting on our own challenges here in the U.S. And so without that, I think, we are, in a more fragile position, and it's hard to promote our values vis-a-vis countries like China and Russia, for example. Trump last night mentioned that we had pulled out of the UN Human Rights Council, which is a hugely important forum for holding other governments accountable on these issues. And so the fact that we're not there anymore it's really, I would say, disastrous in the short term. Hopefully we'll be back at some later point. But, these are, the critical moment. It'll be up to other organizations to kind of hold the line and promote these efforts. But unfortunately, the U.S. is taking a step backwards.
Disastrous because we're not there, to influence it, or disastrous because it gives the that body less authority?
So both, we're not there to influence it, and it limits their authority, for example, to do, observation missions in countries, for example, places like Sudan, to document human rights abuses that are, taking place that both of the armed groups are involved in. Documentation that's important for prosecution of, whether it's, war crimes or genocide determinations later in the future, right? So, not being able to do that kind of work really limits our ability to hold those actors accountable who are committing these types of horrible abuses and crimes. And so, the Human Rights Council really plays that critical role, and it's a place where, countries have to come and report on progress that they're making to improve the human rights situation. So without the U.S. there to play that role and be that advocate, really does affect, the ability to do this going forward. And countries are going to feel, more emboldened to even, care less about these issues going forward.
We have about 60 seconds here. I'm really grateful, Enrique Roig, that you spent the hour with us. What do you want to leave us with? What should we, concerned citizens, many of us change makers in our own right, what should we be paying attention to?
Yeah, well, let me just say first, it's been a pleasure to be here with you, Dominique. And I think hopefully I've been able to provide, more information on the important role of foreign assistance, particularly USAID.
Absolutely.
I know one of my reflections has been that, we probably didn't do a good enough job in the past communicating these efforts to the American public. And so I think one of the positive takeaways from all of this now is that we're all being forced to do that. And hopefully, we can get USAID and foreign assistance back on track in the future and make these connections back to the American public to demonstrate why this is so important to our own national economic security going forward. And again, like I said, it's literally an investment of $36 a year, 6 Starbucks lattes that you're paying for out of your taxpayer dollars to do a lot of important work that helps a lot of people overseas, but also is of great benefit to the American public. So, call your representatives, let them know that you care about these issues and why they're important.
Appreciate the conversation.
Thank you very much.
I'll leave you with the Desmond Tutu quote today. He says, "We are each made for goodness, love, and compassion. Our lives are transformed as much as the world is when we live with these truths." Tavis Smiley is up next. He's got a full, jam-packed show full of information, knowledge, and conversation. That is next. Don't forget to tap in with me on all the social media. I'm at DiPrima Radio. The station is at KBLA Talk 1580. Like my mama used to say, history is now, and we are making it together. Until tomorrow, be well, be informed. One love.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
I'm Bree Wood with 4 Things You Should Know with BIN News. President Trump's Tuesday night address to Congress was the longest ever, highlighting his leadership and plans for the U.S. Several Democrats